All right, so continuing on with Chapter 8, the next section we'll go over is list and briefly discuss four management development techniques, or methods, sorry. Whenever we've talked a lot about developing employees and developing new employees as we bring them in, but there's also a certain level that we are going to have to develop our management in order to address our new strategies. So the first things we have to look at whenever we're looking to develop managers is first thing we need to assess the company's strategic needs, same as anything else that we've talked about. We ultimately have to know what we're trying to fight for in order to fit that. Then the next thing we need to do is appraise the managers based on their current performance. This isn't to say that the current performance is necessarily bad, but it may not just be in line with the strategic needs that we're looking for. Take, for instance, if we were to change our strategic focus into a different direction, obviously our managers are going to have to change and adjust in order to meet that. So just because we're reviewing current performance doesn't mean current performance is bad. It's just not strategically aligned with what we're looking for. At that point, after we've appraised our current managers, then we move into the stages of developing them and making them fit the strategies that we're looking for. So, implementing management development programs. The first thing we're going to do is management development is an attempt to improve managerial performance by imparting knowledge, changing attitudes, or increasing skills. The management development process, like I said, is assessing strategic needs, appraising managers' current performance, and then develop in the direction that fits the strategy that we're looking for. One of the tools that we can use is called a 9-box grid. And it's a tool that we use in order to know whether a candidate has potential and then also what level of performance meets with that potential. We can see this as on one axis of the grid, we're looking at the potential for the employee, or in this case, the manager. Whenever we started with recruiting people, we looked at what potential did they have. Managers, even though they're already on the job, also have different levels of potential that we're looking for. And we can usually rate these between low, medium, and high. We don't have to go into a lot of granular detail, but we can judge it based on those three categories. And then on the other axis, we have to look at performance, whether the performance is low, medium, and high. So where we get the 9-box grid is the intersection of all of these three. And what we can use this for is in order to find who has high potential and high performance, who has low potential but high performance, low potential, that type of thing. That way we can structure how we're going to develop different managers. Do we want to develop them in the roles that they're in? Do we want to develop them into higher level roles? A lot of this will be spelled out by figuring out, are they performing where we need them to be or where their previous performance needed to be? And is there potential for growth within this candidate? Managerial on-the-job training is very similar to whenever we're talking about employees on-the-job training. The on-the-job training that managers do sometimes takes a few extra steps, including what we talked about before about job rotation. This is even more popular with managers just because managers will sometimes switch departments outside of their comfort zone to bring extra skills into different departments. You'll also have times where the manager may be mentoring somebody or they may be being mentored by somebody. So that performs the coaching understudy approach. Typically, if we have a manager that we want to move up into new roles, we will assign them with a coach or assign them as an understudy to someone more senior to them. That way they can help mold this person with high potential into a role that we're looking to fit them into. And then finally on here we have action learning. Action learning programs give managers and others release time to work analyzing and solving problems in departments other than their own. Basically meaning sometimes we will actually trade managers around just to see how different people will approach different subjects. It may not seem relevant to pull a manager from accounting into an operations department, but at the same time, an accounting manager may see things very systematically. They may see numbers, whereas somebody in the operations department may not see it the same way. So maybe that switch around will help people see things differently and be able to approach problems in a different perspective. We also have certain levels of off-the-job management training. In some of these, like the case study, which presents a trainee with a written description of an organizational problem. This doesn't necessarily always have to be specifically the industry that they're in or even the company that they're in, but maybe it's outside of their perspective. And what they do is a lot of times they'll put together little groups. They'll give the case study to everyone in the group, and then they can discuss it. They can see how different people approach the problems, diagnose problems differently. Sometimes these are real examples from other companies or even other departments. That way people can look at things that is not in their day-to-day. And sometimes people need to step away from what they do every day in order to grow. Computerized management games is a way to train people by giving them realistic situations and allowing them to act out how they see fit, just to see how things would go. So this doesn't necessarily always have to be games. Sometimes you'll have simulations and things like that, but it gives people an opportunity to step outside of their comfort zone and try something they normally wouldn't have, or just try things a little differently. We have outside seminars, which are just what they sound. Is we can have managers go to whether it be industry seminars or conventions and things of that nature to hear people speak about other topics, which then they can bring back to the company and see how it could be administered in their own division. University programs, sometimes universities will have groups from different industries, different programs, different companies all come together just to discuss things that are in the field, things that are happening, and things of that nature. That way they can see things from other people's sides of the world. And we also have what's called role-playing, which I'm sure some of you may have already gone through this for different training exercises as an employee. It also helps as a manager to be able to see situations and figure out how they're going to respond to them in an environment that is not mission critical. It's not on the job. We also have behavior modeling, which we've talked about before whenever we're talking about an employee, where we address training of a very specific, this is how we want things to be, this is the ideal or model process, and that way people can learn from that. We have what's called corporate universities, where we actually bring a collection of people together that we can learn as a group. You'll pull a manager from accounting, pull a manager from HR, pull a manager from IT, and put them all in a room. That way they can develop skills together. We also have what's called executive coaches, which are people outside the company that actually come into the company and help a manager grow, help find their strengths, find their weaknesses, find out what they can do in order to grow as a manager. And we also have this is the Society for Human Resources Management. It encourages people to learn new skills and get certifications in different areas. This one is very specific to HR, but no matter what industry you're in, there are certifications that correspond with that industry. There are certifications in IT, there are certifications in accounting, there's certifications for just about everything. That way that you can prove your value and learn things the ideal way. We're going to skip over the GE example. This is another one that's in the book. So we went over, just to review quickly, the strategy for a manager's development is very similar to an employee's development, that it must line up with the strategy of the company. We went over different types of on and off the job training. Some of these can be very specific, some of these can be very broad, but it just depends on what we see that manager needs to develop on. We have different types of coaching, whether that be you have a manager with a senior level manager, or even a manager with somebody from the outside. That way we can learn to develop that person and make them grow as a better manager. And then we also went over like the action learning, the cases and the games and everything of different methods in order to develop a manager. Also outside and university, which these are just different training methods, but it works just the same for employees as it does for managers. And role-playing, behavior, corporate universities, everything. All of these are different ways to address different types of issues. It just depends on where they see the needs that need to grow. All right, list and briefly discuss the importance and steps in leading organizational change. Change is probably one of the most difficult things within an organization. And it's not always necessarily the change that people have the problem with. It's the fact that they're being forced to change. We as human beings change all the time, but we want to have control over it. But as an organization, whether it be we change strategy, maybe we need to find different ways of doing anything, there's always going to be change within an organization, and we have to feel and find the best way to approach it. That way we're going to get cooperation, we're going to get a positive outcome from it. So some of the things, what are some of the things that we can change? We can change in an organizational structure, and this is very common, where we move things around. Sometimes departments will get split up, departments will get mixed together, we'll change how something is done, we'll move things around. Maybe we see that the way that we've done things for years just isn't efficient, so maybe we need to move things around to become more efficient. We can also change technology. As new things come out, in order to stay up with the trends, we're going to be expected to change with it. For instance, if you're in an industry that has built everything by hand for decades, and then all of a sudden we have a new piece of equipment that can do the job of a couple people, simpler, more efficient, and have better quality, there's going to be some level of resentment there, and we're going to have to figure out how can we implement this new technology without alienating our employees, or while still using our employees, or moving people around. There are a lot of other types of changes that we can do. Some of them small, some of them are huge. It just depends, but it depends on what is our strategy, how much needs to change in order to achieve what we're looking for. We have what's called the Lewin's change process, where it has 3 distinct steps within it that help people to be able to adjust to a new change. Basically, unfreezing means reducing the forces that are striving to maintain the status quo. We need to break down the things that are keeping us where we are right now. If we have a group of people that are refusing to accept this new technology, maybe we need to influence that group. Maybe we need to change that group. We need to find a way to uproot them from the way that they've always done things. Maybe we can say, well, we can put out more product. Nobody's going to get laid off. Would you accept that? It's a method of unfreezing what we've already done. And then what we do is we actually make the change. We need to make sure we break down all of our barriers first in unfreezing before we move into the moving stage. That way, because take for instance, if we have that group that's going to resist this new technology, if we were to go straight to implementing the technology, they're still going to resist it. They are still going to push against it. Maybe they're not going to use the machine. Maybe they're going to intentionally break it. Things like that. So we need to make sure we uproot any forces that are going to hold us where we are before we actually make the change. And during this moving process, we learn what the new behaviors and new processes and values are. That way, people know what is to be expected. And then finally, after we've made this move, now it's time to refreeze it into a new status quo. So we find ways to reinforce. We find ways to nurture this way so we don't go back. To use the example that we had a group of people that refused to use this new machine. Maybe we entitled them that if we use the new machine, we will be able to be more profitable, put out more product. So then in the moving phase, we actually implement the new machine, teach them how to use it correctly, and show them how this is going to be better. And during the refreezing phase, we make sure that they continue to use it. We reinforce them using it. If we see that somebody is using it correctly and is doing a good job with it, we reward them in some way. That way we're reinforcing that this is the way we want it to stay. If we weren't to refreeze it and make sure that it's a new way of the culture, it's going to slide back to the way that it started from. So just a few details about that process. The first one, unfreezing stage. Urgency and commitment. Need to show people that it needs to happen right now. And you also need to get commitment of all of the people that are involved to make sure they're not going to push back. During the moving stage, you have what's called a coalition, where it's a group of people that are going to help you implement this. It's a group of people that are going to be supportive and share with what you're trying to do. Especially if you're a high-level manager and you're talking to the frontline employees, they're not going to want to accept what you're saying unless other employees are involved. If all of the frontline employees are against it and there's no coalition on your side, more than likely it's going to slide back to the way that it was. You also need to make sure that everybody involved shares your vision, which is also a mission, but shares in the vision that this is going to be better, that this is going to increase something, increase efficiency, increase productivity, increase morale. They need to share that vision. The next one is they need to accept that it is true. They need to accept this new piece of machinery. They need to accept the new way of doing things. And then they also need to be able to see the gains they're going to get from it. If the company increases productivity, but it doesn't benefit anybody at all, or they don't see the benefit, they're going to be more likely to start sliding back again. And then finally, like I said about the rephrasing stage, where we reinforce what we're actually implementing to make sure that it stays there. And we need to monitor it to make sure that we don't start to slide back to the old way. If we're monitoring something that starts to slide back, we're going to have to maybe move back a little bit in order to get that refreezing stage into the new way of doing things. All right, so organizational development, which is a form of change within an organization. Organizational development is a change process through which employees formulate the change that's required, then implement it. The key part of this is process through which employees formulate the change. Whenever we're talking about organizational development, we're not usually talking about the CEO or the president that just makes mandates. It is the employees are the ones that see the need and make the changes. So a couple characteristics that make organizational development unique. It usually involves action research, which means collecting data and feeding the information back to the employees, and in which case the employees make the hypothesis and make the change and find ways to solve the problems. Like I said, we can collect, if we were on top, we can collect the information, but we give the information to the employees and let them develop ideas themselves. The next one is it implies behavioral science knowledge to improve organizational effectiveness. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is make a company, make a process, make something more effective by changing how people think. Change how people behave, how they act. Not necessarily how many turns you can get on a bolt before it's tight. You're actually changing how the person goes about tightening the bolt. And then finally, it changes the organization in a particular direction, such as towards empowerment and improved problem solving. Empowerment is a concept in which you allow employees to make decisions for themselves. We give them the power to make their own decisions. We give them the power to come up with new and creative ways of doing things. And we're not going to override them. We're not going to go against them. We're giving them the power. As far as the human process applications, the goal of human process organizational development techniques is to give employees the insight and the skills required to analyze behavior more effectively. Like I said, this is a human approach to things. And if we want employees to be able to make decisions, we need to give them the tools. We need to give them the skills in order to do this. So this could be from the training side of things, is we train people these skills. We don't train them how to solve the problem. We give them the tools they need to solve it for themselves. The technostructural interventions, organizational development practitioners also involve in changing firms' structures, methods, and job designs. They then use various strategies such as quality circles to help manage needed changes. Along the lines of empowering employees, sometimes they see needs outside of what we can, but we can't give them the power to do everything. So look at it this way. We have a group of factory workers that they have gone through. They have found better ways of doing things. They have found how to develop their own strategies and their own behaviors, and they want to restructure the whole department in a different way. Obviously, we can't give them full control over something like that, but we give them the power and the support to come to us, and we help them move in that direction. So we give them the methods and the influence in order to make some of these changes. The HR management side of things, we use action research to enable employees to analyze and change their firm's human resource practices. We give them the tools, and they work the tools to find the solutions. So sometimes it comes back on us as we need to find ways to give them the right tools. And strategic interventions use action research to improve a company's strategic management for alignment with long-term organizational plans. This comes back to everything that we have talked about as far as the strategy of the company. This may mean that the set of employees may see the strategy differently, or see a method of finding that strategy or pursuing it a little bit differently. So we may need to realign how we're doing things. All right, so just a quick overview of organizational development. Of change management and organizational development. First thing is some of the things we can change within a company. We can change structure, we can change technology, we could change products. All of these things influence our employees. We have Lewin's change process, which involves unfreezing and removing barriers, moving, which includes making changes and finding support within an organization, and then finally refreezing, where we solidify what we've done and reinforce it so that it can stay right where it is. And then we also have the organizational development change process, where we empower employees in order to develop within themselves in order to solve problems a little bit better. All right, explain why a controlled study may be superior for evaluating the training program's effects. Oftentimes, we think, we just have this idea that a training program is going to be perfect for everybody. And so we just go full bore and let it go. But sometimes we have to look at different ways to evaluating whether something is really beneficial or not. Evaluating the training effort. The first thing we have to do is designing the study itself. There are two basic issues to address when evaluating training. One is the design of the evaluation. In particular, uses controlled experiments. And the second one is, what should we measure? For instance, controlled experimentation. If we were to lay out a training program to an entire organization and we either had better or less results, do we know it was because of the training or because maybe something else happened? Whereas if we do a controlled experimentation, we say we have a small group that we implement the training, and we compare them to a group that didn't have the training. So we have a way of judging, was it the training that made a change, or was it something else within an organization that made a change? And we can actually see those effects. And then also training effects that we can measure. The first one is just basic reactions to the training. There's often going to be times that, especially whenever you're training an employee, they're going to be like, I just didn't like the training. It may have no bearing on anything else other than the fact that they just didn't want to be there. So that's one way that we can gauge a training, is what reactions are we getting from it. The next one is learning. What did somebody learn? Did they learn what they were supposed to learn? So we have this level of, did the training actually do what it was supposed to? The third one is behavior. Did our training change behavior? Also, along the same lines of learning, did it actually get somebody to learn it, and did they act upon it? You could have an entire program put together and people learned a lot, but it didn't change what they did on the job. So was it really effective? They might have learned a lot, but they couldn't use any of it on the job. Was it worthwhile doing? And then finally, we also have our direct results. This goes somewhat into behavior. Did we get the results that we were looking for? Can we see an increase in efficiency because we taught them this new skill? Or are they more prone to be better customer service? Did they get the results specifically that we were looking for? So some of the things that we have to review are the designing the study itself. Make sure that we're looking at how are we going to measure and what are we going to measure. Controlled experimentation means that we're actually just looking at an identifiable way of controlling what we're looking at. And then the second part is the training effects. What are we measuring? Are we measuring the behavior that comes after it? Are we measuring simply just what they learned while they were there? Or are we measuring results? All right, so now we are to the Paris Hotel again. So I will see you guys in Chapter 9.